Good evening, Key Biscayne. My name is Andrea Aga, the village manager. Thank you very much for being here with us this evening. Tonight is the fourth of four series of town hall meetings that the village staff has put together to help educate and inform the community on some of the resilience projects that we are working on. The focus of the series has been the GEO bond, which is a ballot question that will be before the voters of Key Biscayne on the November ballot. With us this evening from staff, we have Mr. Jake Oziman, who is our Public Works and Building Department Director. And we also have Roland Samimi, who is our Chief Resilience and Sustainability Officer. Presenting this evening will be Jake, and I'll take a few slides as well. I would like to acknowledge and thank Mayor Davey for being here with us tonight. I understand a few other council members might be joining. As soon as I see that they're on, I will acknowledge and thank them for their participation here. And I'd also like to recognize Mr. Jeff DiCarlo, who is with the village attorney's office, and he is bond counsel for the village. So he's available as well. So without further ado, our topic for this evening is going to be on the hardening or strengthening of our infrastructure and the roadway improvements that are also part of, again, that buttoning back up of the street. And so what are we talking about? We've got a GEO bond on the ballot in November, and we're trying to familiarize everybody with the language of the bond. So I'll read it here nice and clearly. So shall the village issue general obligation bonds not exceeding 100 million in one or more series maturing not later than 30 years from their issuance date, bearing interest rates not exceeding the maximum rate allowed by law, payable from ad valorem taxes levied by the village to obtain these three objectives. First is to mitigate the effects of sea level rise and flooding, to protect the village beaches and our very precious shoreline. Very and precious are my words, not going to be in the ballot question. And to strengthen our infrastructure to the effects of hurricanes. And it is a simple checkbox. You are for the bonds or against the bonds. So one point that came up at our last town hall, and we've tried to take in the feedback that we're getting from the community, and thank you for giving us feedback, and please keep it coming. There was a distinction made by one of our council members and we wanted to clarify what the vote on November 3rd does do and what it does not do. So just to clarify for the record, the vote on the bond in November in of itself does not raise taxes. It does not obligate the council to use GOB funds. It does not preclude alternative funding sources. It does not authorize us to issue any debt. It does not identify the specific projects, nor does the vote prioritize projects. So we wanted to make it clear, these are the things the bond does not do. Automatically, in of itself, the vote does preserve access to a funding mechanism. So that distinction is very important to us. We've heard a lot of discussion in the community, and we want to make sure that the residents are aware and familiar and understand what the bond does and doesn't do. So it is preserving an access to a funding mechanism that doesn't obligate our council to do, quite frankly, anything with it. So making that distinction, moving to the next slide, if you will. So this slide should look a little bit familiar. We touched upon this when we were discussing the sea level rise projection and the shoreline protection issues. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jake Oziman. He's going to go through a series of slides here that are going to share with the community what the projections look like and how, in particular, our evolving island is going to be able to withstand the impact of hurricanes, of the rising sea levels, and what the nature of the projects are that are going to help us be more resilient and be able to implement some really sustainable practices to keep the island above water and safe and healthy. So with that, Mr. Oziman, if you would take it over.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Manager. Again, we open it up with this infamous graph I understand, we'll send this number of times, but it's very important to analyze and try to understand what this represents. Right, the sea level rise we talked about over and over and over, and we'll continue to talk about it because it's happening. Even this week, the anticipated king tides, it started yesterday and on September 16, and will continue until 22nd. And then we'll have another week on October 14 to 21, and then we'll have November 13 to 18 and December 13 to 15. Anyone who's interested in see it with their own eyes, what's happening, sea level rise and the water seeping in, you invite them to the closest one, community center garage, and look at the wall and watch the water seeping in. And anybody that lives in condominiums, you could go down to your parking garage and you will see water coming out from the cracks on the concrete floor. Or if you want to go some of the low-lying areas in single-family areas, Westwood Drive, West Heather Drive, West Mashta, Hampton Lane, number of streets, Allendale, you will see the water coming out of catch basins and cracks on the asphalt roadway. So it is happening. It's out there. Anybody wants to witness it this week, especially tomorrow morning, we're going to have a high tide and king tide. So it's we also, as a staff, the village will document it, and we may be able to share it on our website for residents and for them to see. Going back to this chart and what it represents. This is the Unified Sea Level Rise projections by the Southeast Florida Climate Compact, and it's dated 2019. These are projections for 2019 December. And here are the few things to take away from this graph and really remember. Number one, the sea level rose about 4 inches from year 2000 to 2017. So that's a fact. It's not a projection. It's not a conspiracy. That's a number that's been measured. And you will see 4 lines here that I want to clarify what they are. These are basically probability. The low one is IPCC median, and IPCC stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're based out of Switzerland. And the following is, the second one is NOAA, that's National Atmospheric, Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. That's their intermediate high projection. And one up is NOAA high, and all the way in the top is NOAA extreme high. Now, going with the lower end of the middle pack, which is NOAA intermediate high, it is projected that by 2025, the sea level will rise about 9 inches relative to year 2000. And similarly, by year 2040, the sea level will rise about 17 inches, again, relative to 2000. And again, it could go all the way up to this projection is 2120. When we compare it to this projection that was done about 5 years ago, 2015 one, actually things are getting worse. I don't have it here, but it is actually 2015 was more optimistic, and this is actually, it's not. And when you look at 50-year planning horizon, say you want to buy a house and you want to be there, you want to keep your kids to be there for 50 years, if that's what you plan for, see that NOAA intermediate high is about 40 inches of sea level rise that we're expecting. So it is a little bit of a confusing graph, but once you understand it, tells you a lot of the story. So that's why I want to make sure that we revisit it. Now, what that means for Key Biscayne, the map that you see on your screen is current tidal flooding. Basically, all the blue areas are the areas that experiences tidal flooding at least once a year. You will see north side of Crandon is like almost blue, and you will see center of Key Biscayne, K8 is like one of the worst areas in terms of flooding, and you will see some flooding on the east side of Crandon Boulevard as well. Now, these two side by side, again, 2016 is 4 years ago, and then 2025 projection. one important thing that I like to note is there is no adaptation efforts are included in this projection. So this is do nothing scenarios. If you do nothing, in about 5 years, you'll see amount of flooding as compared to 2016. And as you can tell, 2016 wasn't too long ago, and 2025 is not too far out either. Going to project the tidal flooding for 35 and 45, things are progressively getting worse. 2045, I would say good 3/4 of the village will be flooded. And here's one more figure that I have. It shows, it's a little bit confusing. We get 9 levels, but just to have a better understanding of the inundation that you get from the tidal flooding. The percentages on the table that's shown as the chances that you will experience tidal flooding at least once a year. The green is the low chance, as you can see, mostly the high-rise condominiums, the south end, and also the newly built ones are high. They are low, but central Key Biscayne and residential area, they're high chance of experiencing flooding. You will see there a lot of red. Chances are almost 100% that at least once a year you will see tidal flooding, if not more. And how is all this relevant? I want to show some pictures and how it affects daily life in South Florida. This is overtopping. So sea level can rise and overtop your seawall, and have water coming in, or it could come from openings from your canals and boat ramps and such. This is our community center, seepage. You don't have to have a storm surge for the water to come in. That's how much of water. Actually, this is after the hurricane, but I want to show this picture because, again, if you go to the community center garage tomorrow in the morning, the king tide, you will see the exact water level, water dripping out at that same location. Disruption, the rainwater, one is Ocean Lane Drive. The second one is also Key Biscayne Street. You could tell that amount of rainfall runoff, and it's not going anywhere because the water level is very high. And this is a graphic illustration of how it affects our shoreline. Imagine if you do nothing, you may lose your entire shoreline. There will be no beach to enjoy. Again, relevance of projections, rainfall. The one on the left is actually a well right by our beach park. Myself and our maintenance supervisor went out there, and then I wanted to see how high the water level was. And you could see that since the groundwater level is so high, and we are also very close to the ocean at this location, it was extremely high. Imagine we get another rain event, we'll get flooding is twice as high. And the picture on the right side is another picture, courtesy of Fire Chief Lang. He sent it to me, tells you the story. Storm surge. This picture is not Key Biscayne, but I picked them up from one other presentation in Climate Compact. It does really tell you the story on how the storm surge on high tides could impact coastal roadways and streets. So that's where I'm at with sea level rise. And then now I'm gonna touch a little bit on utility undergrounding and strengthen our infrastructure. Over the past decade, multiple hurricanes have impacted the South Florida area and caused widespread of power outages. In September 2017, the Hurricane Irma made a landfall in Florida Keys as a Cat 4, and Key Biscayne experienced a number of outages for a long period of time. Similar to many other municipalities, Key Biscayne took charge, and we started investigating the feasibility of relocating overhead utilities, including power line, communication lines, and telephone and cable, and bury them underground. And also we commonly refer to this as underground. how does the village get power? It starts at power plant in Homestead, FPL power plant. You have power transmission lines, and from mainland, it goes underground and comes to Key Biscayne substation right by Calusa Park. From that point, we have distribution feeders and primary laterals that connects and helps power to come from substation all the way down to the transformer in the street. Just to give some perspective, within the FPL grid in Key Biscayne, there are about 701 utility poles. There are 16 miles of overhead wires. There are 12 miles of underground wires. We have 343 transformer pads, overhead transformers. We have 211 at grade pad transformer. We have 41 switches, and we have 13 capacitor banks. And then in this image, you'll see that the transformer street, and then from that point, it goes to the meter, electric meter at each home. Impacts of undergrounding. There are a number of good impacts, and there are also some negatives. So let's start with the good ones. Obviously, the biggest impact is safety. Utility undergrounding reduces the number of exposed power lines and reduces the number of potential downed power lines and poles. It increases reliability. These are FPL statistics. It's 80% reduction average number of interruptions per year, 80% reduction in average outage duration per year, 89% of the overhead feeders and 24% of overhead laterals impacted by Hurricane Irma experienced an outage, and 30% of the underground feeders and 4% of the underground laterals impacted by Hurricane Irma experienced outage. So you could see that there's a big gap on what's overhead and what underground in terms of reliability. And also, it's important to add that it provides additional aesthetics. You don't see ugly utility poles. Also, in Key Biscayne, it's very typical that utility lines on the backyard, there's an easement. So the property owners can claim back their easements and possibly build permanent structures if permitted by the code, and also reduces or eliminates the need for FPL to come and trim the trees. I understand some of the residents are not happy about it because they trim the trees so much. And what FPL refers this as a line clearing, actually. They don't call it trimming, they clear it. So they just come and cut it. Some other impacts of undergrounding is it's out of sight, so it's a good thing, but it also has a negative impact. Because the lines are out of sight, outages generally take longer to diagnose and resolve. So yes, it is unlikely that it's going to go down, but once it goes down, it may take a little bit longer to bring it back up. Cost, we all know upfront capital cost is extremely high. When we did this study, our professional service consultant came up with somewhere in the neighborhood of $49 million, village-wide undergrounding, and pad-mounted equipment. So a lot of transformers that up in the air at the pole, it's going to be pad-mounted. So during the flood, they are, if they're flooded, they typically take longer to restore, but there are some remedies to it. We can put them high enough so that they're not that susceptible to flooding. There's some switch cabinets that's waterproof that cost extra. That's also included in the $49 million figure that I mentioned earlier. And switch cabinets can be waterproof. And also, again, there's some aesthetics that some of those cabinets going to go in front of some homeowners that they may not necessarily like them in their front yard. Construction phase, I wanted to kind of revisit this. So there are a few different methods of doing this job. Number one, directional boring. It doesn't mean that we're going to have to cut open every street. There'll be there's a directional boring method that you could have entry pit and exit pit and both ends of the street and run the lines. That's one way. Open cut trench is another one, most traditional way of doing it. It's cheaper to do it, but it's more disruption. And then we'll have service installation, obviously. Transformer pad is going to be installed, and there'll be new service line running from from the street to the home versus right now it's coming from backside of the house. And we're going to restore the pavement. Again, depends on how this project is coupled with another project. We may take advantage of open cut trench, or we may do directional boring, or combination. This is the end of the undergrounding, and then I wanted to put this slide towards the end to kind of illustrate how all this come together, and I'll turn it over back to the village manager to wrap it up.
Thank you, Jake. So what we wanted to show here, this is it's not Key Biscayne, it's just for illustrative purposes, but I've been getting a lot of feedback from the community and a lot of really good questions about what are the essential, life-saving resilience measures that we are going to take, and what are perhaps the nice to haves, and then those elements of these proposed projects, which again have not been approved by council and will be at some point with specific cost estimates and project timelines and actual engineered drawings and the like. But what we wanted to show here was the concept of why, when you do an infrastructure project below ground, that it's a really great opportunity when you're closing the road, right? We say buttoning up the road, to really think holistically about how the configuration of the roadway will impact not only our quality of life and the values of our homes, but more importantly, our resilience. So kind of going left to right here. So the concept of a complete street, I'll start with lighting, right? So, and I know there are some areas in the community that are very well lit. There are some areas that are not very well lit. We have identified that we have some safety concerns for the areas that aren't well lit. But I can tell you from my personal experience that the first time I lived in a home with a very bright, very safe street light outside of my bedroom window, it cast a shadow on my face, and I understand how we need to find that balance of safety and introducing lighting that would allow for us to perhaps get out of our cars more and be walking throughout our community. So having a safe well-lit pathway to walk down sidewalks and perhaps crosswalks and perhaps bike paths. As you kind of move left to right, one of the other critical components, and we've circled them in orange in this diagram, what the village is really focused on when we're speaking to the stormwater improvements and when we're speaking to the undergrounding of utility improvements and roadway improvements, with regard to the geo bond, and I really want to focus on the intention, as I understand it from council, based on the direction we have received, is that the geo funds are not to be used for operating expenses, and they're not to be used for things like, beautification. That's something that is not a resilience initiative in of itself for purposes of this discussion. And really, so it's the undergrounding of the utilities is one element. It's called active roadway in this illustration. You'll notice just below the orange line throughout the entire cross section, there's a dotted black line, and that was the previous elevation of the road. So if you look at the contours of the road across the entire cross section, you'll see on the far left, for example, how low the ground is at that point. You'll see that the pedestrian areas toward the sidewalk underneath the light and the palm tree on the left are slightly higher. And then as you get to the roadway, there's a bit more of a recession. You have the underground utilities, typically, toward the center or the crown of the road. And then you also on the next side, you go through the roadway elevation is a critical element that we need to look at. Bike facilities are not something that are mission critical for resilience, but something that we would recommend considering and looking at when you close the road back up. And also the planting in the greenways and trails. So in of itself, making sure that we do the right plantings and we have the right tree and the right place in mind is obviously very important to us, but it is not a mission critical component of the resilience project. Neither are greenways and trails. However, if you jump over to the far right, the idea of bioswales and green space those are absolutely mission critical to our mission of keeping the island dry and above water. And they're also a critical component of a well thought out, integrated stormwater management plan. So having the green space and having the bioswales in particular, you can see here, there's a slight recession or a little dip where the bioswales are. And that serves as an area for water to be retained and then for water to percolate through the soil before it meets any of our infrastructure or before it gets down to the aquifer or before it becomes problematic and sits on our roads and creates flooding. And the green space is the same concept. The more pervious space that we have where water can sit and rest and percolate through the earth to reduce the peak flow is very important. So our goal here was to help everybody understand what the concept of a complete street is. It includes the pedestrian, the bicycle, ADA accessibility, lighting, as well as the undergrounding of utilities and our underground stormwater system, and the very, very important green space, either for water retention and the right grading so that the water can not only rest, but that it can get out of where we are trying to move out of the sidewalks and out of the roads. The reason why we have stormwater infrastructure in blue, again, this is a geo bond workshop, and although we're focusing on the engineering and the science of these projects, I did want to make the point that the stormwater infrastructure is in a separate fund. The funding is through the stormwater utility fee. At this point, the council has authorized the rate increase, which residents have experienced. You're getting that through your water and sewer bill, or in the sense of the condos right now, you're getting that through your condo association. And moving forward, we are looking at a different billing collection method, but that's neither here nor there for today's purpose. But we wanted to make it very clear that there is a dedicated funding mechanism in place to at least advance the first few projects up to the tune of about 19 million worth of just the stormwater improvements. So with that, we wanted to turn it back over to, first I'd like to acknowledge Vice Mayor Moss. Thank you for joining us. Councilmember Petros, thank you for joining us. And if anyone, I think those are the elected officials that we have. And of course, Mayor Davey, who's been with us from the beginning. So thank you for that. And with that, we can open it up for questions and answers.
Andrea, if you don't mind, I'd like to just add in and emphasize the idea about the stormwater utility improvements being funded separately from the GOB, but an integral part of an overall utility improvement process. And as the stormwater is being worked on and it's the deepest utility to have to be upgraded, that sort of sets in motion a number of other utility upgrade related activities that would then be covered under the GOB if the council decided the GOB at the time was the most practical and effective, cost-effective way of funding those associated projects, which would obviously be the undergrounding as appropriate, and then the roadway improvements as necessary, elevating in certain areas, maybe not elevating in other areas, elevating a little bit more in some places or a little bit less in others.
Right, right. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Hopefully the community can kind of resonate with the themes that we're trying to introduce here, and thank you for that. So if any of our council members want to provide any comments or feedback or questions, we'd happily hear from you. Otherwise, Pete, if you want to open it up to the community, if anybody has any questions for us, we'd be happy to answer them.
For the ladies and gentlemen watching at home, if you have any questions or comments, please call 305-365-7569 and then enter the meeting ID of 231-627-8415. And for those members of the public currently in the meeting, if you have any questions or comments, please press *9 on your telephones now. We have one caller, and it's going to be caller with the phone number ending in 497. Caller, please dial *6 to unmute yourself now. Again, telephone number ending in 497, please dial *6. Caller, you are live.
Hello?
Hello, good evening.
Is that me?
That's you.
Ceci Sanchez, I am puzzled. I am puzzled by your diagrams because it does not resemble our streets. Those diagrams, I don't think Key Biscayne has anything like what you showed. I would like to see a Key Biscayne reality and just show us how can we adapt our community to resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Thank you for your comments. No problem. We are actually happy to do that. You're right. That is not a typical section in the village. Jake, would you kindly pull up? We have two things, Ms. Sanchez, that might help everybody understand how complete streets might impact the village. So typically, our right-of-ways, we have basically 4 types of typical sections that we... My kids are going to play with dragons now. We have 4 typical sections. We have some roadways that have a right-of-way width of about 80 feet. We have some roadways that have a right-of-way of 100 feet. And then Crandon Boulevard, which is unique, and Harbor Drive, which is also unique. So we did go through the exercise of looking at what a complete street typical section might look like in those 4 areas. I was a little bit hesitant to present this in a format such as this because, to your point, Ms. Sanchez, you know, we don't want to show things that are not Key Biscayne. And although this is possibly what one typical section could look like in the village, it has not gone through a complete community engagement session, and the council has not approved this. But to your point, so if you look to your screen on the left side, we have a before picture, and on the right side, we have an after picture. So in this example, some of the things that we've done is we've taken the approach, which is the portion of the property between the roadway and where your property line actually starts. And we've converted that into a pervious substance. There's actually a really, really cool new technology that we are going to be implementing on the drainage and parking improvements along Fernwood and Village Green Way that takes a very, very durable material that has about 4-inch cylinders, and they are stacked up one next to each other. And you can either fill them with real grass, with gravel, with artificial turf, and it is entirely pervious, and it is structurally strong enough to be able to withstand the weight of a vehicle, which is pretty cool. So in the illustration you have on the right, you can see where those tree lines are, which is the swale area. You can see sort of a checkered pattern, and that's where we've introduced this concept of a pervious material that can withstand the weight of a vehicle. Then you can also see the street lights. They're decorative street lights. There are quite a few different varieties of street lights throughout the village, but we chose one that is more of an intimate street light for purposes of illustration, that is below the tree canopy level, so it won't hopefully cast shadows in one's bedroom, but it'll provide enough lighting to have a nice stroll in the evening time. If you could go back just for a minute, Jake, I wanted to point out a couple other things. So, and then you've got bike facilities. One thing that I've particularly noticed with regards to the Safe Routes to School program, as we're trying to help the schools safely reopen with regard to COVID, many of our residential roadways, especially those that have more mature canopies, where you really would enjoy the walk down the street and there are no sidewalks, part of what we could look at, and we'll obviously be getting lots of community input as we move through this process, is you could even arguably make some of these roads one way. And if you can think around the community school, there are some examples where you can see that the traffic flow has been designed to be able to help the drop off and the pickup of the students in the morning and the afternoon. And also, if we were to go one way in an example like this, you could actually move the facilities. You could have a wider facility where you might even do, motorized golf carts, one lane of, traffic for vehicles, one lane for perhaps, golf carts, and then maybe a wider sidewalk where you could actually have two couples, walking in different directions and, perhaps an 8 or a 10-foot sidewalk. So that's one example of a typical section. And this was based off a real street. We took the street names out just, to kind of call that out. Here's another example of an existing roadway where we've introduced a median. In that example with the median, you can see there's actually concrete barriers along the edge, which is one strategy. If there was a real need on that roadway to have underground infrastructure below that median, that's when you would do a curb and gutter type infrastructure. Alternatively, on the swale areas or in a median, you could have more of a retention area where you would see sort of a dip. Typically, that's on the sidewalk side, not in the middle. But again, the more green space you have, the more pervious space you have, the better. The other thing we've done here, as for consideration for illustrative purposes, is include additional parallel parking. So there are some neighborhoods and some of the smaller multifamily residences on the east side of the island where parking is an issue. And we found in particular in McIntyre and around the community center, we have a lot of residents and their guests that there isn't sufficient parking where in their condos, so they park in those public spaces. So that's something for long-term planning purposes that we really want to address. And by thinking holistically and introducing these roadway improvements while the streets are open, we hope to be able to be really visionary here and really be able to provide for what the residents need. So that's the second example. And I don't know, Jake, if you had
the others, I don't have it readily available, but I'll share it.
Okay. So those are some examples of what might look like on the surface for us. And keep in mind, below ground, we go back to that rendering we shared in the presentation that had the underground utilities under the crown of the road. And typically the stormwater infrastructure would be off to one side or the other. So Ms. Sanchez, if you're still on with us, hopefully that answers your question. And if not,
and additionally, the rendering is just to be able to conceptualize what a complete streets approach means, because I don't think a lot of people understand what complete streets really represents. So, I mean, there are a broad range of roadway improvement strategies that can be employed depending on the area of the island and the nature of the roadway and the characteristics of the roadway, characteristics of the neighborhood, and the size of the right-of-ways and stuff like that. But this schematic just basically lays it all out there to be able to conceptualize how the various utilities and infrastructures interrelate.
Right. Thank you for that. Okay, Pete, anyone else have any questions or comments for us?
At the moment, no. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are in the meeting currently and you wish to have a question or make a comment, please dial *9. And again, for anybody watching at home, if you have any questions or comments, please dial the phone number 305-365-7569 and enter meeting ID number 231-627-8415. And we do have one caller with the phone number ending in 307. Caller, please go ahead and press *6 now to unmute yourself. Caller, you are live.
Good evening. Thank you. Good evening. It's Charles Collins. Are we having fun yet?
Absolutely. More fun now that you're here. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. I have a question. I realize you can't editorialize, but let's assume for the moment that we're talking about undergrounding. I joined you late. I have undergrounding. It's a great thing. I hope everybody gets to enjoy it. Let's assume for the moment that the $100 million bond fails. Would you be able to repackage the undergrounding as a standalone bond issue and move it forward immediately?
So I think there are quite a few considerations that would need to be considered to look at that. But I think if I understand your question, and if not, please help me, because I want to make sure I understand your question and answer the right question. Could these projects be taken on face value and handled separately, one apart from the other? The answer is yes. That is a policy decision by the council. And could there be alternative funding mechanisms or a hybrid approach? The answer to that question is also yes.
And is there any, what's the word in legalese? It's not dismissed with prejudice. You could turn right around and immediately start work on packaging undergrounding as a bond referendum with clear, you already have the study, you have some numbers. Is that correct?
We have a mass. I'm sorry?
I think Mayor Davey no.
So, I mean, I think, Mr. Collins, the short answer is I believe in undergrounding. It's something when I first started, one of my first opportunities with the village was to work with the undergrounding task force to be able to get a handle on the intricacies of the funding and the procurement and the construction methodology and the delivery. So if that is a project that, as a resident of the village, if our residents want to move forward with that project specifically, I would encourage you to reach out to your council members and make your arguments and your compelling arguments known, so that your elected officials know what you're thinking and how you want to proceed. From an administrative perspective, once we get the green light, we can, with the right funding and the right engineering and science, of which we would be provided by the council, should that be the wish of the community, we would absolutely be able to deliver.
Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
All right, Madam Manager, I don't have any other callers requesting to speak.
Okay, well, I would like to also recognize Mr. Benjamin Nussbaum, who is our Chief Financial Officer. And I don't know if I introduced Dr. Samimi, who is our Chief Resilience and Sustainability Officer when we joined. He's chimed in a few times. So maybe we give it one last pass to see if any callers want to call in with any questions. And I will also say that if you weren't able to join us in person this evening, we are re-airing these on channel 77, and you can also view these on our YouTube channel on demand. So hopefully that helps everybody stay informed. Pete, one more shot.
Yep. Ladies and gentlemen at home, if you're watching, please take your attention down to the bottom of your screen and dial 305-365-7569 and enter the meeting ID of 231-627-8415.
Also, these presentations are available through the vkbresilience.org website. And that website is also accessible through the village website. On the homepage, over to the left, top selection is a link to the vkbresilience.org website.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I will also take the opportunity to point out that this has been such a tremendous opportunity for the staff to really be able to showcase some of the work that we've done, not only since I've been here, but I assure you these plans and the studies that the foundation has done, and the vulnerability assessment, and some of our community partners and D Squared and the Green Committee. There has been a lot of really, really detailed work into helping the village get to where we are now, and having the level of understanding and depth of resources to be able to focus on these projects. And as a principle of ethics, village staff does not advocate either for or against bonds. At the end of the day, we believe in the resilience projects. We believe in doing them in a methodical, logistically sound way. I think at one of our last meetings, I think there was this comment made, what is our tolerance both financially and, emotionally and psychologically with regard to the potential disruption. These are major infrastructure projects. And right now, although it feels like a lot of money and it feels like it's a long time away, it is a lot of money and it is going to last us a long time, but we need to take action. And the staff has been working really, really hard. And I'm very, very, very grateful and appreciative for the work that we've done. And our goal in this series, and this is the last of 4, is to really help the community understand what the projects are, recognize that we've got the talent, we've got the ability, the engineering is ready. We want to move forward and deliver these projects. We want to engage the community. We want you to know what we're doing and why we're doing it and how it's going to improve your quality of life, how it's going to improve your property values and make us a stronger island. And the difficult decisions on policy and funding mechanism lie with your elected body, and you've got a great council. And I look forward to continuing to work with them, whether we go this route or whatever funding mechanism the council lies on. It's just really important that the community understand that these projects are real, the costs are real, and the results will be real. So with that, perhaps one last ask, Pete, if anybody is interested in speaking.
Ladies and gentlemen at home, if you have any comments or questions for the panel, please dial 305-365-7569 and then enter meeting ID 231-627-8415. For those in the meeting currently, if you do wish to ask a question, please dial *9 on your telephones now.
All right, Pete, thank you for another meeting well done. Thank you, Jake and Roland, for putting this together. And with that, that concludes the 4th town hall we are having on this topic. Please do visit our website, reach out to us, come by and speak with us, wear your mask, stay socially distanced. But we are here, we are available, we are accessible, we care about this village and about its resilience and sustainability in the long run. So please take advantage of all the knowledge that we have and all of our deepest desire to make sure that the village is healthy and well. So I wish you all a good evening and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you very much and have a great night.